we're actually going to segue into a movie that we both saw, which really relates to our Fabulous Four podcast series called I Am Duran. So, the stuff that we just talked about probably going to be done by tomorrow night. So hopefully people got to listen to it either Friday night or Saturday morning. But this piece, the movie doesn't come out until middle of next week. So if you feel like, you can listen, it's not going to be spoiled. This is a little bit more evergreen content because we're going to talk about this movie. But the movie is, it's directed, gosh, I just had the name of the director. What was the name of the director?
Mat Hodgson.
Mat Hodgson. There you go. So this kind of came to us. Like he's a British guy, right? Like he's not Panamanian. He's not from America. Like he's a British guy who I'm assuming just had a great interest in Duran's career and in boxing in general.
Yeah, I thought this was a really good film. Mat Hodgson is a British director. He's done a couple of films before. He did one on Ricky Hatton about his last fight.
Hatton's Last Stand from 2013.
And he's been producer on a few others. One about Carl Frampton, one about the McGuigans. Like he's a sports film director, and
he stole the name. He stole our name, by the way. It's called Fight Game, the McGuigans.
But he's a guy who obviously knows and loves the sport, because I thought that really came true in this film. Sometimes when you have somebody from the outside looking in, they don't necessarily pick up on the little things that, boxing fans will value. And I thought he absolutely nailed this, and just in terms of the footage was so carefully selected. The interviews were perfect. There was so much to like about this film. As soon as you mentioned that we could watch this, I was like, I am all in for this.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get enough of this stuff as long as it's good. And I thought this one was like really, really, really well done. There was a lot to unpack in Duran's life in just a 90-minute film, but I think they did him tremendous justice in this.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. And it's so funny because, we just got done, a couple months ago doing the epilogue. And, Roberto's the one that he continues fighting. And because of the car crash, maybe he does keep fighting. Unfortunately, he got in that car wreck. But this documentary ends after the Barkley fight, and I thought it was such a fantastic way to end, and where they're sort of like he does this really cool thing where obviously the Panama Canal is a big thing, and you see a lot of Ronald Reagan in this movie. I was popping for all the Ronald Reagan clips, and just the idea of Duran and his people and who he stands for, and this fight with Barkley, and the fight with Barkley, it really looks like a fight from Rocky, like just the back and forth and back and forth. And I just thought it was such a fantastic and poetic way to end the fight or end the movie. And like, if I had thought before, if I would think, normally, how do you end a film like this? Oh, you probably end it with Duran and Leonard, where they both kind of have to hang it up. But no, he ends at a very high point. And I thought it was just a magnificent way to tell that story.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny that you say that, because I actually had that written down. I have that written down here on my notepad to actually mention that as well. Because, when we did the Fabulous Four series, I was pushing to do the epilogue with you. I was like, we had to finish out these stories for each of these guys.
Yeah.
And most of the reason for that was just for Tommy and Roberto, just these stories of guys who just kept fighting on. I thought there was something to that. Just, they fought out like that. Just no way to take them away from boxing, and they were going to fight for as long as they could. I thought that was a fascinating just look at, what kind of makes them tick. But at the same time, within the story that Matt Hodgson is telling, I thought, they got it perfect by not including that later part of his career, and it was a brave move to cut off the Leonard fight. They mentioned the Leonard fight just in the closing credit notes, but they don't actually show it. They finish at a high point, and it was almost like, what they talk about, with the way they talk about the Barkley fight. It's almost like, they're saying that Roberto was over the hill at this point, and it was just like going beyond his physical limits.
Right.
It was just like, he's pulling something out of himself to get this great last performance. And, it's one we also called it, the great last performance of his career. And, being that this movie was a celebration of Roberto Duran's career, it was the perfect place to end it, because, it finished on a high note. And, obviously there was other reasons why, it would have made a lot of sense for them to tie into the last Leonard fight, because, this movie was very politically framed. A lot of what it was based on was, the political climate in Panama at the time. And obviously, Mass happened just 13 days before the U.S. occupation of Panama. So that fight kind of played a huge part in the story they were trying to tell. But they chose to end it at the high point of Roberto's career, rather than those later fights. And I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah, so I went a little bit backwards, but we'll go back to the beginning. I just thought is this my favorite? Like, as good as this movie was, that was my favorite part, and I thought it was just so well done. So this story, if you follow Duran, everything about this guy. If you're a fight fan like us, what I loved about, at least in the beginning stuff, is you actually saw a lot of the guys who were in the documentary. You saw Stallone, you saw Mike Tyson, obviously Sugar Ray, because Sugar Ray's a big part of this. You see Hagler, but just the fandom that Mike Tyson has for Roberto Duran, just comes out in just in spades. Also Stallone, some of the way that Stallone described Duran. Then they played the clip from Duran in Rocky 2, which was kind of cool to see Stallone talk about, because I've seen Rocky 2 probably 100 times, but there's a level of respect they have for him that is a little bit different that you usually see, because they definitely reference just the nastiness, and sometimes his especially in the build up to the Sugar Ray fight, he was really kind of probably wrong to do some of the things that he did, especially towards Leonard's wife. But there is a respect for an old school nasty boxer, the pomp and circumstance, the exact opposite of what Sugar Ray, who Sugar Ray was. But I just really marveled at how respected he was to these guys, and it's just a different way of acknowledgement that you usually see in sports today. It was an old school tough. This guy was just tough, and that's what I respected, was his toughness, his nastiness. It wasn't about, oh, he was a good guy. It was no, it was the opposite of he was a good guy.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the interviews included in this, I think they got just super lucky in this, in that, whenever you make a film like this, you need to get these talking heads, and there's a balance to keep between getting people who are big names and people who can actually add something of substance. And with this one, they just so happened that they got the big name guys were people who were super invested in Duran and really could add something that was worth it. You couldn't probably ask for two bigger stars in terms of presenting boxing in the popular culture than Sylvester Stallone and Robert De Niro, respectively, in Rocky and Raging Bull, and they both have personal connections to Roberto Duran. In terms of, the modern boxing, they have, Ricky Hatton and Mike Tyson, two huge, larger than life characters who are also both worship Roberto Duran and are close personal friends of him. And, then you also got his rivals. You had Leonard, of course, always speaks well. You had Barkley in there. You didn't have Tommy, which was kind of the one absence in this movie. And I don't know, maybe Tommy there wasn't that much Tommy could say on this, because really, he just knocked Roberta out pretty quick. I don't
Yeah.
that much story to tell. But I think the big get for them on this, and I thought he looked great, was Marvin, because Marvin does very little of this type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you like? It seemed like a lot of these interviews were done a while ago because of just how young some of these guys looked. Now, Stallone definitely looked like maybe 5 years younger. Marvin, like you said, Marvin looked great. Ray, I can't tell with Ray because he always looks young in just about everything. But it seemed like some of this stuff was maybe recorded previously. I don't know if Hodgson in some of the other documentaries he was doing, he also was kind of had the idea that he was going to do a Duran one at the same time. So maybe he was asking questions about Duran in knowing that he was going to do this. But I couldn't gather what the time frame was of all of these interviews.
Yeah, but there's also Don King and Bob Arum are interviewed in there, given the promoter's perspective. Manuel Noriega is interviewed in this. Roberto's family's interviewed in this. You have kind of the boxing insiders, the journalists. You have Larry Merchant's involved. There's such a wide breadth of interviews on it, and I think all of them are really good. If anything, probably the drawback is that it was too broad, in that you didn't get to hear enough of any of these guys. I would like to hear all of those interviews uncut.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is one of these things, just with the way media has changed. If this film was released 10 years ago, they'd more than likely do an extended edition with a 2-disc version where maybe you could watch all those interviews, and with streaming services and things like that, there just isn't a home for those extras really anymore.
Right.
But if you're a boxing fan, you would love to see all that footage. And just some of the actual clips they showed in this film are great. There's some really early Duran fight footage, some real grainy old footage that's awesome. But then there's also just stuff that just kind of gets lost in the shuffle over the years. Things that maybe that were from a press conference or a TV show or a news piece or something like that maybe doesn't get uploaded to the internet when people put up these fights and things like that. You get little bits of Roberto training, or just clowning around, or doing some interviews and things like that are just if you're a fight fan, it's awesome footage. And I'd love to know from the director's perspective how much material he started with, and how much stuff he had to cut out, and if he would like to put, if he does have any ideas to kind of what he's going to do with kind of some of that footage, whether it's the interview stuff or the archive footage, or even kind of the current footage they shot with Roberto, which is really great as well.
I think most people, when it comes to Duran, especially if you're an American fight fan, you want to see the stuff with Ray. And like we said, there's reference of the third fight, but they don't actually show it.
And no mass isn't the focal point of this story, which I thought was important. It's a big part of it, but it's not the big part of it.
Absolutely. And so the basically the point that I was kind of heading towards is how you handle that story, I think, becomes very important, because it's what people know most about him if you're not a hardcore fight fan. Like, it's kind of the biggest thing, right? And so I kind of think, I was trying to think back to the 30 for 30 documentary and how Roberto answered those same questions. I thought the way that they handled this both fights in this scenario was great, because it was almost like a culmination of everything we read from all the different books, and it felt like, I'm sure when you tell the same story over and over and over and over and over again, it changes somewhat, and maybe your feelings that day are a little bit different. But I felt like that was truthful, like what they were saying. The focus of that 30 for 30 was for Ray to get the one answer from Roberto, like, why did you do that? That kind of thing. And this one, I thought they were both very matter of fact. They weren't chasing down some sort of created storyline. They treated it like it was and like it happened, but obviously through the lens of, guys 40 years later or whatever. But I was just wondering how you thought, or 35 years later, whenever those interviews were recorded, I was just wondering how you thought they handled the first two fights.
No, I thought they did a really good job. I think, I think the way they kind of told this story was through those key fights in Duran's career. It was kind of the Buchanan fight. It was the first two Leonard fights, the Davey Moore fight, the Hagler fight, and then the Barkley fight. Those were kind of, the dots they threaded this story through. And I felt like he did a really good job of, both celebrating the success of Roberto in that first fight, and as you said, just kind of getting through to some of, like, kind of what made him tick. It was some of the nastiness, some of how he got in Ray's head, and then also just kind of, bringing back the other side of it, where you can empathize with him, where
right.
You saw how tough No Mask was on him, and I thought it was it was a nuanced portrayal. Like, as you said, it wasn't all one thing. They showed, like, all sides of Roberto. So,
I think one of the interesting parts was the Davey Moore fight, which we talked about in our podcast series. But it was like, here's the turning point. And the story of Duran losing that second fight, and just not being able, the country treating him differently, and he really has to get the respect back. And I thought it was amazing because, when his wife is talking about, like, why does he keep fighting, and he's just like, it's for these people. And what it made me wonder is, if the No Mas fight doesn't end the way that it does, and they go the distance, and Leonard, kind of runs away with it. How is his life different? How does he can he retire?
Do you think he doesn't have that drive to just keep getting up to, like,
right.
Is that what motivated him to keep picking himself back up?
It's almost like an overcorrection, right? Like, that was a moment where it stands out as, the moment that changed his life. And so he sort of overcorrected the other way, because he didn't want to be seen as a quitter in any way ever again. And I just wonder, how does his whole career change if he just loses the fight and goes 12 rounds and doesn't quit, or 15 rounds and doesn't quit, and, Leonard gets the better of him. It made me think, like, the story of his career probably changes, and maybe he doesn't have that renaissance at the end, which is literally all about him having the drive for his fan base.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and it's one I hadn't really thought about before. I do think a lot of this resurgence in interest in the last few years has been, a big part of that is Roberto picking himself back up from No Mas. I think that's kind of was the focus of that 30 for 30 series, and there's been a big resurgence of interest in his career in general. You know, there was the movie with De Niro, and there was also like his newest biography came out recently, and I think, you know, what people are drawn to is that story of, you know, that drive of just, you know, of a guy who just wouldn't give up. He would just always go back to it.
So, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to talk about before we move on to the last topic of this show, which is, I just want to get your thoughts on the Double or Nothing show, even though John and I talked about it already. But anything else you wanted to wrap up with on this?
No, just like this gets 2 thumbs up from me. I'd recommend, you know, anyone who listened to our series and enjoyed it, I think they're definitely going to like this. And just if you're a fan of documentaries, I think you'll really like it as well. Like, it's a very well told story.